I think it's no secret to anyone who's been watching my channel, especially recently, that I'm a huge fan of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. The games offer a lot of different and unique strategies you can try to use during each playthrough, and there's a ton of interesting ways to play through one of these games. I often find myself finding some really cool new way to use a move or an item I previously thought was useless every time I play through one of these games again. Explorers of Sky in particular is a fan favorite Pokemon game, with many people seeming to like it more for its story than the gameplay. While I disagree with the idea that this game is perfect or anything, I still do love this game and find myself coming back to it every couple years or so. I also happen to love completing the Pokédex in Pokemon games. It's a personal goal of mine to complete the Pokédex in every single Pokemon game, so I wanted to cover Explorers of Sky in a video while I was still in a Mystery Dungeon mood after the WiiWare modding. Now, I've already completed the Dex once before in Explorers of Sky, so I wanted to shake things up a bit to make this video a bit more interesting for myself. So today, I'm going to take you through my journey to speedrun recruiting every single Pokemon in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. The speedrun we're going to be doing in particular is the Recruit 'em All with Wondermail category. Now, before you click off this video thinking I'm just going to be spamming the exploit I covered a few months ago, I think we should discuss the rules of this category. In this category, you're of course required to recruit every single Pokemon, as you might expect. However, in every Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game, aside from Gates to Infinity, you're required to have a living dex for it to count as having completed the Pokédex. The game itself tracks it in this manner, and you can see this when opening up the recruitment list in a dungeon. You're also required to have all permanent alternate forms of any Pokemon who has them. So you need, for example, all 28 Unknown, both Shellos, both Gastrodon, all 3 Burmy, who cannot change cloaks in these games, and all 3 Wormadam. This game is all Pokemon from Gens 1 to 4 except for Arceus, giving us 525 Pokemon we need to recruit in all. Additionally, while Wondermail codes are allowed, you're not allowed to enter a Wondermail code which provides a Pokemon or an egg as its reward. There's an exception for this rule though, being the legendary challenge letters. Mewtwo, the legendary beasts, and Jirachi are only obtainable in Sky through their challenge letters, and usually require an insane amount of point grinding and getting lucky with their jobs appearing. Jirachi's challenge letter in particular is also really interesting for reasons we'll get to. You are still allowed, however, to take missions from the job boards that reward either an egg or Pokemon for completing them. This rule just makes it so 80% of this run isn't typing passwords. There are also rules related to breaks, and using a timer for both your in-game time and real-life time to include your breaks for runs at this category that are intended for the leaderboard. I, however, opted not to follow these rules and make this run an unofficial speedrun instead, as I didn't think I'd be able to meet the break rules anyways. There's apparently talk about those rules changing again, so if my run ends up there at some point, that would be why. If you want to see the full run, there's a link to a Twitch playlist containing all the VODs for the full run in the description. Now, if you're wondering why I'm personally choosing to do the Wondermail category instead of no Wondermail, the reason I'm choosing to do it is because I think the no Wondermail category is better saved for Time and Darkness, as no Wondermail in those games is infinitely more interesting for reasons I'm sure I'll discuss someday. You might now be thinking, well, if that's the case, why are you still doing Sky then? Well, it's because Sky with Wondermail also happens to be a very interesting run. There are parts of the run that are similar to the no Wondermail runs of Time and Darkness, but they branch off very differently later on, and I think both are eventually worth discussing. I think I'd prefer to save the much harder and way longer Time and Darkness true no Wondermail version of this dex for when I'm more experienced at video editing though. Of course, I really don't expect anyone to watch this entire video in a single sitting. It ended up being a lot longer than I originally thought it might, so there will be chapters in the description if you leave and want to come back to it later. I'm not going to be mentioning this game's story for the most part here either. I originally was doing so as the script went along, but the video's script was 32 pages long by the end, and purging all of the story only reduced it by 3 pages. The last thing before we go on is I should mention that the on-screen tracker might be inaccurate at times during the run. I had some technical difficulties, and I also mismarked a few things here and there. I fixed the worst cases of this in editing, but there are some smaller cases I left alone and will mention them as they happen. There's also a couple of instances where the timer just froze, but in those instances, I added the missing time before the next stream, so it'll fix itself on screen eventually. All that's out of the way, so let's get started. Our journey begins like with many other PMD games with a personality quiz. In Explorers of Sky, the answer to the first question in this quiz, did you play Explorers of Time or Explorers of Darkness, is super important. You wouldn't think it is, however, answering yes to this question will double the recruitment rates for the Pokemon who are on screen right now the first time you recruit them. If you think you are ever going to consider going for any of these Pokemon during your playthrough, you should always answer yes to this question. As for the rest of the quiz, the Pokemon we're trying to have as our leader is Riolu, who requires us to get the sassy nature as a male for our quiz results. Riolu isn't actually going to be the Pokemon we use for the entire run, as Riolu is actually incapable of recruiting every Pokemon. However, it is still our fastest option for getting through the main story. As for our partner, we picked Totodile. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure why Totodile is chosen as the partner. I'm assuming it just happens to be good at the main story as well. If you're familiar with Recruitment, you might be asking why I'm not using Chikorita, which is the only starter who is capable of recruiting all Pokemon in the game due to its IQ group. The reason is because we don't really have to use our starter and partner for as long in this category anymore as we used to, and there's a better option instead once we're in the postgame. We can play the game as normal up to Mount Bristle, with one small exception. In Beach Cave, I make sure to attack a Shellos East Sea, Corsola, and Shelder, as these Pokemon are really annoying to recruit later on, and by attacking them here, they can potentially give us missions which may lead to recruiting them for free later. With Mount Bristle cleared, we can now enter Wondermail codes on the main menu. We enter 8 codes, one of which puts the treasure chamber from Zero Isle North as the first floor of Beach Cave for us to get the Golden Mask, an item which increases the chances of us recruiting Pokemon by 20.1%. We also receive 7 missions that'll get us a total of 9 Golden Seeds to level up Riolu. You might think this is so we don't have issues with dying to random enemies, but this is also to increase the odds of us recruiting Pokemon. You get a recruitment bonus based on your current level, with it capping out at an extra 24.5% chance at level 100. Even though we're not going to be using Riolu the entire game, we'll be using it long enough that it's worth getting the increased chances. As for how we're getting 9 items with only 7 mission codes, if you do a mission which has you prospect for an item, you get to keep the item you find in the dungeon and get an additional reward for completing the mission. We'll be using this trick multiple times to save time on entering codes. The other missions we use a lot are find item missions. These missions are where you need to find a certain type of item in a dungeon, and if you leave the dungeon with that item in your inventory, it counts as the mission being cleared. You don't need to go to the floor to find the item for these missions either, so you can just clear 8 missions at the same time if you have the right items in your inventory. For our first free day, we go to Beach Cave, grab our Golden Mask from the treasure chamber, find our Golden Seed on the 2nd floor while having the defense scarf we got from Wigglytuff earlier and a Pechaberry in our inventory, which gives us 4 total Golden Seeds. The next day we have Sentry Duty, a mini-game where you need to figure out which Pokemon is trying to enter the guild based on its footprint. Unrelated note, but I love this minigame, though I was clearly rusty at it as I found out during this run. We do a perfect run here though, which gives us a Joy Seed, which we can use later to help us with evolution should we need one more level. Once we're done with Sentry Duty, we can do our other set of Wondermail missions to get 5 more Golden Seeds by giving up a Big Apple, Max Elixir, and an Orin Berry spelled with an E. This is a lookalike item, a mechanic exclusive to Sky. We don't see a lot of lookalike items this run, however these particular items are guaranteed to have shown up by now. Though I didn't remember to grab the Big Apple in advance, so I needed to go to floor 4 to grab it. Thankfully, the items will always spawn on the floor the mission is on during a find item mission, so we can just go to floor 4 and grab one then leave. After the missions are done, we can move on to Waterfall Cave. At this point in the game, Chimecho calls us over and rings the friendship bell, allowing us to finally recruit new members to our team. At this point, I will often be checking the job board looking for missions which can provide us some of the harder to recruit Pokemon later on. I go set up my inventory for missions we'll do later and get started in Waterfall Cave. I give myself the Golden Mask and start eating all of our Golden Seeds, getting us to level 55. For the moment, this gives us an extra 12.5% chance to recruit Pokemon in addition to the 20.1% chance from the Golden Mask, making our total boosted odds for the moment an additional 32.6% chance at recruiting Pokemon. During our trip here, I also recruit Psyduck, Poliwag, Tangela, Wooper, and Lotad, bringing us to 7 Pokemon. I didn't get every Pokemon I wanted to get here, however you have to come back to this dungeon later in the story anyways, so we'll handle the others at that time. Once we're done there, I go back and enter some more passwords. The first 2 are for missions at Drenched Bluff that'll provide us with a Tight Belt and 2 Golden Seeds. The Tight Belt is an item that prevents your belly from lowering at all, which is very helpful for sitting around on the floor and spawning more Pokemon. The other 6 are in Mount Bristle, and this is for 7 more Golden Seeds, which allows us to reach level 100 and max out our chances of recruiting more Pokemon for the time being. When you're level 99 or higher, your recruit boost jumps from 12.5 to 24.5%, which is a big difference. We head out to Drenched Bluff to do our missions and recruit Anorith in the process as our 8th Pokemon. The following day is a Sentry Duty day, which is pretty quick to complete. Next up is Apple Woods. We bring in all our golden seeds to the dungeon with us to reach level 100, the pinnacle of power for recruiting Pokemon. With this power reached, we can now officially begin grinding out the Pokemon we need in each dungeon. During our trip to Apple Woods, I catch Caterpie, Paris, Oddish, Burmese Sandycloak, Bidoof, Butterfree, Hoppip, Executor, 2 Weedle, Combee, Kakuna, and Gloom, bringing us up to 21 Pokemon. I enter in some more Wondermail codes before moving on. This is the last set we'll be entering for the rest of the main story. The first one is in Mount Bristle, and gives us X-ray specs and a weather band. If you've played this game before, you're probably familiar with X-ray specs. They let us see where all the enemies and items on the floor are. I'll be using this to help locate Pokemon I need to recruit. The weather band I'll explain a bit later. During this trip to Mount Bristle, I recruit all the other Pokemon left to get in the dungeon, being a Doduo, Spinarak, Starly, Geodude, Nidorino, and Nidorina. After doing another Sentry Duty, I do 5 missions in Apple Woods to get 3 more Golden Seeds, a Mobile Scarf, and a Fight Gem, along with a Blizzard TM that I proceeded to not realize I got until writing the script for this video. Would have been really nice to know that I had that. Fight Gem is the reason we got the weather band earlier. While you have it in your bag, during clear weather, any fighting-type Pokemon in your team has double movement speed. The weather band makes it so that the weather is always treated as clear for the Pokemon holding it, so this means we can use this effect whenever we want from here on. We don't use this item during dungeons we want to recruit Pokemon in, as this uses up more of the limited turns you get on each floor while holding A and B, so we'd get less time to get Pokemon on the floor if we were using it. We got it to speed through the next few dungeons, as recruitment is disabled during the expedition, which is the next thing we'll be doing in the main story. Before we do the expedition though, I need to go and beat the first special episode, Bidoof's Wish. You can technically do this at any time, however I wanted to complete this as early as possible so that Lunatone and Bronzong will be able to give us missions, as they appear as enemies during this episode. If you're wondering why we're doing this at all though, beating this episode is a requirement in order to accept Jirachi's challenge letter later. This is the only special episode that has any significant impact on your main save file. This episode is unreasonably hard to beat for how early it is available to play, so it takes a couple attempts to actually beat it. Normally the Snover who joins you during the first couple of dungeons is a real problem, but we have a weather band to deal with that. The real issue for us is at the end of this episode. We have to fight Jirachi as a level 10 Bidoof that only knows Tackle and 2 status moves that don't affect Jirachi at all. And for some godforsaken reason, this Jirachi has Rest, completely invalidating any of the damage you do to it. I died the first time I did this fight, and got sent back to before the guild saved Bidoof, the last save point. During the second trip, I find a Chesto Berry and throw that at Jirachi so it has Sleepless status and can't use Rest. With it being unable to heal and a ton of Reviver Seeds used, we beat Jirachi and Bidoof wishes for new friends at the guild, effectively kicking off the game's story and potentially being the entire reason for the destruction of time. Since I attacked a Lunatone and a Bronzong during this episode, they can now provide missions too, which getting either of them would be a big deal as both are really tough recruits to get normally. With that obnoxious side mission done, we can continue on with the main plot and get ready to go on the expedition, which I don't really need to discuss as it's mostly irrelevant for our purposes, as recruitment will only get enabled again once we're back at the guild. Once we're done brushing the expedition, I go and put the Fight Gem back in storage to do another Drenched Bluff mission in the meantime to go recruit the rest of the Pokemon there. The mission gives us the Secret Slab, which is needed to recruit wandering legendary Pokemon later in the game, and the Volt Globe, an item that makes ground moves not damage electric type Pokemon, which we'll be using later. During this trip, we recruit Shellos Westsea, Lileep, and Chingling, bringing us up to 30 Pokemon. I go to Foggy Forest for a mission next, and also for more recruits. In Foggy Forest, the mission is giving us a Frustration TM, which I've already made irrelevant by doing Bidoof's Wish early, but more importantly, the Pierce Band, an item which we'll be using in the post-game to grind IQ. If you don't know how that's related, you'll see what I mean when we get there. As for recruits we get in Foggy Forest, I grab Hoot Hoot before I use an escape orb because I missed the prospect item on floor 1. I go back to Foggy Forest after this and finish the mission I was supposed to do last time and recruit the other Pokemon, being Dunsparce, Skiploom, Smeargle, Cherubi, Pachirisu, Stantler, Pinsir, Bunnery, Breloom, Zigzagoon, and Noctowl, getting us up to 42 Pokemon. About this time in the run is where I do something I really shouldn't have done here. I decide to do a random Mount Horn mission from the job board instead of doing Amp Plains here to progress the story. This wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if there wasn't a day we go to Mount Horn for recruits already routed in soon. So I really should not have done this here. But either way, it's what I did next, and so I grabbed all 10 of the Pokemon that were in the dungeon. Parasect, Shroomish, Natu, Ariados, Pineco, Beautifly, Aerodactyl, Venomoth, Bonsly, and Cascoon. The mission here rewarded an egg, which can't even be useful unfortunately, because it can only hatch into things from the floor, and none of the Pokemon in that pool are particularly hard to get. Now that the Mount Horn stop is done, I continue on with the main story and go to Ant Plains. On our way through, I recruit Mareep, Elekid, Minun, Girafarig, Flaffy, Tauros, Yanmega, Dodrio, Electabuzz, 2 Electrike, and Ampharos, bringing us up to 63 Pokemon. Once we're at the end of Ant Plains, we get attacked by a tribe of Electrike and Manectric, who we beat rather easily. I go and make a quick detour to hatch the egg we got earlier by giving up in the dojo for a bit, so that if I get another egg before I lose access to Treasure Town for a while, that new one will be ready when I come back. The egg wasn't anything useful, but you can only hold one at a time, so I figured I'd mention it. This is the point in the story where I'm supposed to go to Northern Desert, but before that, I see a mission on the job board that is guaranteed to be a Beach Cave Egg mission due to the client being Magnezone and the reward being 3 question marks. So I go off and do that, and also recruit an Illumise from another mission in the process. Beach Cave Eggs, assuming they don't hatch into Kabuto, are incredibly useful, as all other Pokemon in Beach Cave are among the hardest to recruit in the game. So we'll be checking up on this egg again later. Now that we're done with the side stop, I go to Northern Desert to progress the story, and along the way through there, I get Sandshrew, Larvitar, Baltoy, Aron, Cubone, Trapinch, Carnivine, Cacturne, Rhyhorn, and Lairon. I missed Cacnea here, and we'll come back for it soon, as this is the only dungeon it appears in, and I was supposed to do only one visit here. Finishing Northern Desert leads into Quicksand Cave, where I recruit Pupitar, Sandslash, Skorupi, Vibrava, Nincada, Hippopotas, Tyranitar, yes, this early in the game, Mawile, and Ninjask. Looking back at this footage, I probably shouldn't have went out of my way to do all the recruits from here yet, as we have to come back to this dungeon later anyway. Once at the bottom, we beat up Mesprit, and I return to Northern Desert to pick up the Cacnea I missed as our 84th Pokemon. I probably should have done this the day I would have went to Mount Horn instead of doing it here, but it's not really that big a deal. Crystal Cave is the next main story dungeon. Here I get Graveler, Beldum, Seviper, Wormadam Sandy Cloak, 2 Shieldon, Golem, and Cranidos before stopping for a cutscene and a really easy puzzle that unlocks the second half of the dungeon, Crystal Crossing. In the second half, we pick up Bagon, 2 Glameow, Wormadam Plant Cloak, and Absol before our confrontation with Grovyle. I decide that despite being really overpowered, that I'm clearly no match for Grovyle and give up, which allows the story to progress in this instance since we're supposed to lose this battle in the story anyway. If you're playing casually, you really probably should be doing this, as you won't lose any of your items or money doing this battle since you're supposed to lose it anyway, and make sure you don't waste revives on a meaningless fight. Once I'm free from cutscenes, I go back and check on the egg we left for Chansey. The egg hatches into Corsola, probably the best thing I could have gotten out of that egg, as it's a really rare Pokemon in Marine Resort normally, who I don't even end up seeing while I'm in that dungeon later. Since there's a free day here, I go to Craggy Coast and pick up all the recruits there. These Pokemon include Krabby, Dratini, Spheal, Wingull, Gastrodon, EC, and Celio. This leaves us at 102 Pokemon recruited for quite a while, as we're about to lose the ability to recruit again. Because I messed up my routing earlier multiple times, I had nothing to do on the second day, so I just took a mission in Drenched Bluff that was fast to do instead. We get called to Treasure Town to announce that the evil Grovyle is taken back to the future with Dusknoir. As Dusknoir leaves, he calls up my team to the front and yanks us into the wormhole with him, trapping us in a desolate future where the planet is paralyzed. As we're trapped in the future, we can't recruit new Pokemon for our team here, and so we just have to rush through the story until we can get back to our own time. Chasm Cave is the first dungeon in this sequence, and if you've not played this dungeon with Mobile Scarf and Fight Gem before, do yourself a favor and try it out sometime. This dungeon is really fun when played with Mobile Scarf. We'll be using the Fight Gem for the entirety of the future arc as well, since we can't recruit here anyways, and it allows us to zoom on through. We go through a few more dungeons before returning to the past, to do one more dungeon we can't recruit in, Tree Shroud Forest. I feel the need to mention that despite us going there with the sole purpose of taking the Time Gear, the team is still shocked when Grovyle takes the Time Gear. Like, what? This has always bothered me. Why are you surprised he's doing the exact thing he said he would? Anyway, once we leave the dungeon, Grovyle sets off to find the other 4 Time Gears, while we're tasked with finding the Hidden Land. We go back to the guild for help, and after Chatot tries and fails to make fools out of us for quote-unquote lying, we get the tip to go through Waterfall Cave again and talk to Torkoal. Now that we're home, we're finally able to recruit new Pokemon for our team again. Within Waterfall Cave, I round out the recruits I missed here earlier by getting 2 Surskit, a Barboach, and a Grimer. I also try and fail to catch a couple of Whiscash, which most runners prefer to get here. However, I really don't agree with this mentality. We don't have a crucial tool yet that would make spawning the 5% Whiscash way easier later on, and I don't want to have to come back here a 3rd time just for Whiscash, so I figure it'd just be better to get a 2nd Barboach instead, and so I do. Once we're done Waterfall Cave, we lose the ability to recruit again after a single dungeon to go finish the main story. So I go grab the fight gem again, go beat Brine Cave, Hidden Land, Dust Noir, Temporal Tower, and Dialga to round out the rest of the main story. You might have noticed that the tracker has gone down from 105 to 104 Pokemon here. The reason for this is that Riolu wasn't actually supposed to be counted yet, as the plan for the starter Riolu was actually to evolve it into Lucario later if we don't get one during Lost Wilderness, which would have removed Riolu from the count anyway. Whether or not we do that, you're gonna have to keep watching to find out. Once the credits roll, I enter 8 more Wondermail missions we'll do after the first post-game dungeon. Once we're back in the game, we begin the graduation exam for the guild, which takes us to Mystifying Forest, the home of the Grand Master of all things bad. We can't recruit during our first trip to this dungeon, so we breeze through that and defeat the Grand Master of all things bad and all of his minions, which also unlocks the ability to evolve Pokemon at Luminous Spring, excluding the main character and partner. Now that we've officially graduated from the guild, that means we don't have to take Riolu and Totodile to every dungeon anymore, something we'll take advantage of very soon. Since we finally have the freedom to recruit things we want again, I go to Brine Cave and recruit everything I need from there. This includes 2 Omanite, Seal, Gastrodon West Sea, Dugong, Tentacool, Kingler, Staryu, 2 Dragonair, and a Walrein. Once we're done in Brine Cave, I do the 8 missions in Zero Elm North, which gives us a ton of extra storage space by increasing the team rank a bunch, and 8 more Golden Seeds. By complete chance, one of the extra random items I got during this was a Sun Ribbon, which we can use to evolve Riolu if we need to do so. A very lucky bonus. Sky Peak's next on the list. Before I go there, I go and evolve my extra Weedle into Beedrill for my 113th Pokemon. I'm gonna be honest here, I think Sky Peak itself is the reason I prefer Time and Darkness over Sky. I just find this dungeon incredibly boring and unnecessary, but go figure, it's one of the last dungeons before we can really start breaking the game, so here we are. We have to climb this mountain with a Shaman as our guide. Now, I said dungeon earlier, but Sky Peak is actually 10 3 to 5 floor dungeons back-to-back with cutscenes between each of them. No Pokemon is mandatory to recruit in here, but I'll still take anything I can find here while speeding through. I grab Metapod, Skuntank, Bayleaf, Weepinbell, Roselia, Torterra, and Ivysaur before we reach the first boss fight of this dungeon. I say boss fight in quotes because this is like the Grovyle fight in Crystal Crossing, where you can just give up and the story progresses as normal. Absolutely no idea why this is the case, but yeah, no reason to ever do this fight. My timer had its first freezing incident during this part of the run, which I didn't fix until the next stream. So for the moment, the time's incorrect. It'll be corrected by the time it's moving on screen again. In the second half of the dungeon, I recruit Primeape, Ursaring, a second Bayleaf, Furret, and Fearow before reaching the summit, which has been taken over by a group of Grimer and Muck. The first run of that fight didn't go so well. Why did you Leech Seed? Why does this Grimer have more health than most of the Mucks did? Why is this Grimer so bulky? Bro, what the fuck is this? You idiot! Why are you attacking that? No, you... No! That counts as a death? Yeah, thanks Machoke for being an idiot and going after the petrified Muck instead of the Grimer who are an actual threat. Anywho, I had to redo the last section of that dungeon because of that, and during that second trip up, I recruit a Hitmonchan, who I keep with me for the fight with Item Master turned off, so I have another Pokemon helping me deal with the swarm of Grimer and Muck. With Hitmonchan's help, we win the fight and finish up Sky Peak with 125 Pokemon recruited. There's one more free day here before we get to the dungeon that completely lets us change the entire playthrough. Before we do that, I enter 8 more Wondermail codes, including 5 separate copies of Jirachi's challenge letter. Don't worry, why we got 5 of these will make sense very soon. I go to Spinda's and make 3 prize tickets for us to use in missions in the next dungeon, and also unlock a dungeon for us to recruit in later. Or I was supposed to do that. I forgot to talk to Why Not here to actually unlock the dungeon, which I'll catch later. Treeshroud Forest is where I go for recruits next. I grab Kadabra, Cherrim, Ralts, Houndoom, Alakazam, Vespiquen, 2 Kirlia, and Ninetales. From missions there, I also receive 4 more Golden Seeds, which we'll be using on our real main once we recruit it in the very near future. Now we're finally at the point I've been waiting for. Mr. Mime is waiting for us outside the guild and gives us access to Blizzard Island. Blizzard Island, or more specifically, Crevice Cave, which is right after Blizzard Island, is the last requirement we need to meet before we can break the game wide open. Before I go there, though, I find a mission that has a chance at rewarding Lunatone as a recruit, so I go to Foggy Forest and beat that mission. We did luck out here because the mission actually does give us Lunatone. Lunatone is one of many infamous spawns from a single dungeon later on, so getting it now is a big win. Once we're actually in Blizzard Island, we need to discuss a mechanic that'll apply to many other dungeons moving forward, spawn rate abuse. You see, despite many floors defining 15 or more Pokemon as potential spawns, only 14 different species of Pokemon can be spawned on a floor at a time. So what happens to the other ones in that instance, you ask? Well, their spawn rate is passed on to the next Pokemon in order, and if that Pokemon's missing, it continues on down the list. I'm going to take an example from my good friend Stargleam's GameFAQs guide on recruiting in this game, which you should definitely check out if you want more information than what's in this video, as it's very detailed and covers many things I won't be discussing, such as the best places to grind out individual Pokemon and recruiting in Spinda's Cafe. In this example, we're in the Ice Chamber of Aegis Cave. On screen right now are the spawn rates for all Pokemon who can be on this floor. Take note of Unknown H only having a 0.65% chance of spawning here. Of course, that's an incredibly low chance of spawning, but now, let's also say, when you load the first floor of the dungeon, you check your list of potential recruits and see these Pokemon listed. As you can see, Golbat and all unknown A through G are missing. If we add the spawn rates of all the missing Pokemon together, we get a spawn rate of 60% for Unknown H on this floor. I'm not going to mention every single instance of getting lucky with spawn rates moving forward, but keep in mind from here on out, even if I don't mention it in the commentary, that I'm checking the spawn rates on every floor looking for good places to grind out the rare encounters, such as every first stage Pokemon in the post-game dungeons, as almost all of them are insanely rare. With this in mind, I recruit Smoochum, Vigoroth, Golduck, Azumarill, Delibird, 2 Nosepass, Piloswine, Snorunt, Castform, and Marill on my way through Blizzard Island. Crevice Cave is up next, and while I did say this is the last requirement for us to break the game, this dungeon by complete coincidence is also where we get our new main. Leave a guess in the comments of who you think it might be. Your options are of course out of the Pokemon I happen to recruit here. So it could be any of Slaking, Zangoose, a second Piloswine, Jinx, Swinub, Weavile, Altaria, one of 2 Snover, Empoleon, an Azurill I risked losing all my progress since my last save over to recruit by being way too close to the turn limit, Sneasel, Slackoth, a second Snorunt, Piplup, Swablu, or Glaceon. You have a few more dungeons before I start using our new main, so best of luck with your guessing. With all our new friends, we go and free Scizor from being imprisoned by a Frostlass, and out of gratitude he gives us the secret rank. The secret rank is the thing we were waiting for to really start shaking things up. You might be questioning how the secret rank, something that only gives us access to getting the 7 treasures dungeons, would break the game. If you're thinking this, you don't seem to be aware of the other thing the secret rank does. The secret rank also allows us to accept Jirachi's challenge letter. What, that still doesn't seem that broken? Well, sure, I guess it's not that broken. If you get one through normal means anyway. But you see, the 5 we Wondermailed in earlier are not normal Jirachi challenge letters, but they're Jirachi challenge letters that are set in dungeons which are not Star Cave. Why does that matter? That would be because Jirachi's challenge letter is special. Unlike the other 4 legendary challenge letters, Jirachi's challenge letter is supposed to unlock Star Cave for us, being the only way we can access that dungeon. Normally this is fine, as all Jirachi letters the game naturally generates are from Star Cave. But what if you were to generate one which doesn't take place in Star Cave? If you were to do that, the game would still unlock Star Cave, but also unlock the dungeon the letter you generated takes place in. You can do this as many times as you like, even after already recruiting Jirachi. And so, the Jirachi Wondermail exploit was born. If you plan on messing around with this exploit, I suggest being very careful while doing so. If you're not careful with what you unlock or play the post-game out of order, you can permanently softlock certain parts of the game out from yourself without replaying the whole game again. The last thing to say about this exploit for now is, as I said earlier in the video, though you very well may have forgotten by now, beating Bidoof's wish is a requirement for being able to accept Jirachi's challenge letter, also making it a requirement to use this exploit. I might make a video on this exploit itself someday that'll fully explain this, and what not to unlock if people want to see it, so if you want that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments below. The most important thing we need to avoid is that we can't unlock the 7 treasures dungeons using this exploit, as unlocking them through this method will permanently softlock you out of the legendaries without using the other Wondermail exploit I covered a while ago, which isn't legal in Recruitment because it's Wondermailing an egg. After unlocking our first few Jirachi dungeons, we go to Why Not and get Landslide Cave from the recycles we did earlier. I also go to Luminous Spring to evolve our extra Curlia into Gardevoir and teach Piloswine Ancient Power to evolve that into Mamoswine. Afterward, we head out to Miracle Sea, a dungeon we normally wouldn't get for at least a little while. Once there, we get to use a niche mechanic to our advantage. The Starmie, Chinchou, and Lantern here have the ability Illuminate, which means whenever they get attacked, they spawn in another Pokemon onto the floor. We'll be seeing a lot of this ability in the future, but for now, I grab a Chinchou from a floor where it's fairly common, Mantike, Lovedisc, Luminion, Slowbro, Quillfish, Whalmer, Slowking, Mantine, Cradily, Relicanth, Sharpedo, Octillery, Tentacruel, Clamperl, Horsey, Gorobus, Finneon, Starmie, Kingdra, Seadra, Remoraid, and after spending way longer here than I really should've, Huntail. I needed to replay this dungeon anyway, so waiting around for Huntail was just a bad play. The last recruit here is the most important one for the run, Lantern. Lantern will be paired with our new mystery main for the rest of the run to allow us to use Illuminate whenever we want, which will drastically speed up all future dungeons. Lantern happens to have the best defensive stats for this job, and it's in the IQ group which gets access to the Stair Sensor and Map Surveyor skills, making it our best option. It's known as Service Fish to the PMD speedrunning community, however I will be referring to it by its species name for the rest of the video, as I happen to just prefer its species name and am much more used to saying that by this point anyway. Once through Miracle Sea, we go beat up a Gyarados that's terrorizing some Fion, and come home to some strange Manaphy who materialized in a third bed we've never owned. Apparently we cure an illness that it had that we weren't aware of, and there's a weirdly tearful goodbye for a Pokemon we never met, but after he's gone, we move on with our lives and get ready for the next dungeon. I'm sure you'll remember this next dungeon. It's a classic, Hidden Shopkeeper Village. What, you don't remember that one? Well, I guess you never played the DS download play demo you can send out to other players from the main menu. There are a few dungeons that are meant for this demo, and we can unlock them using the Jirachi exploit. A lot of these dungeons have Pokemon who are usually very rare through normal dungeons, but spawn super commonly here. While we're in this dungeon, we grab 3 Cleffa and 3 Igglybuff, along with defeating Jirachi, allowing us to recruit it as our 188th Pokemon. With Jirachi recruited, we enter some more Wondermail codes, unlocking 3 more dungeons and giving us some new items we'll be using for the rest of the game. They are the Dragon Gem, Sky Gem, Royal Silk, Sky Silk, and Tuft Bow. This is a big hint for who our new main will be, so if you haven't already guessed yet, it's a great time to do so. We also get 1 more Golden Seed because prospect missions can't be for exclusive items, and it's pretty much free to add one here. These missions take place in Guiding Sea, where we grab our second Whalmer and a Pelipper. The second Whalmer needed to come from this dungeon as it's a higher level of recruited here, and we'll be evolving one very soon. With those codes used, we enter 8 more Wondermail codes, which are all the same treasure chamber we used earlier to get our Golden Mask. We're going to be using these chambers for their Wonder Gummies this time, allowing us to grind IQ onto our new main and Lantern to prepare them for making the rest of the recruits significantly easier. Or just make it possible in the case of a certain shopkeeper I love to rob. And it's finally time to reveal the new main. Has everyone made their guess? It's Altaria. It's kind of obvious, we did get a Dragon Gem, and a place with no other dragons. In order to make the IQ grind faster, we're going to be using the Pierce Fan we got much earlier in the run to throw gummies at our team. If you throw an item like a vitamin or a gummy with the Pierce Band, you get the effect on all Pokemon the item flies through, assuming it doesn't miss. With this, Altaria learns the Fast Friend and Nature Gifter IQ skills, while Lantern learns the Map Surveyor and Stair Sensor skills. Riolu's also given the IQ required for it to evolve into Lucario, as this is our best opportunity to do so. When Riolu's set up for its evolution, I bring an Igglybuff and later a Cleffa to set up their evolution since I'm already grinding IQ. I think 3 of the 4 IQ skills I named previously are pretty self-explanatory, but you might wonder what Nature Gifter does. Nature Gifter is a very powerful IQ skill which requires Pokemon from IQ groups B or H to have 900 IQ in total. Any seed or berries the leader who has this skill eats applies to all Pokemon in the party. This allows us to use our Golden Seeds to level up not just Altaria and Lantern to level 100, but also level up a bunch of other Pokemon to evolve. During this grind, I evolve Igglybuff, Cleffa, Barboach, Bayleaf, Snover, Ammonite, Dragonair, Cranidos, Shieldon, Glameow, Wailmer, Surskit, and Electrike. I tried to deviate from where the route normally goes at this point when it comes to what you bring for each trip to use Golden Seeds on, but it ended up just turning into a disaster of wasted time, and even a Golden Seed wasted on just Barboach. Not gonna lie, I have no idea why I decided using that one seed on just Barboach was a good idea when there's a second wave of leveling I have to do later. This one seed actually does cause problems later. There's an issue with the tracker from this point in the run until the very end of the run where I catch it by complete fluke. I marked the wrong Cranidos on my tracker during Crystal Cave, and so it's marked that I have Cranidos caught here. At this point, I don't have a Cranidos anymore, meaning if we combine this with Riolu being currently unmarked, the counter is accurate again for the time being. It's also very notable that I teach Altaria Perish Song while leveling up here. I've not been covering specific moveset changes up to now, but you're gonna see why I'm mentioning this shortly. During the grind, I also stocked up on Reviver Seeds from the Treasure Chamber, and unlock a few of the 7 Treasures dungeons by taking them from Spindus Cafe. I really should have waited on that last part and only started checking these after I did all this grind, as I had to re-enter a Wondermail code every time I found one of these. I also took way too many Reviver Seeds here. I had more than 6 entire pages of them left in storage at the end of the run. But on the bright side, I was at least stocked up for the rest of the run on that front. I'm sorry that this evolution grind segment was very disorganized commentary-wise, however, it was also this disorganized during the run itself, and trying to reorganize it during scripting did not prove easy. The first dungeon we bring our new mains into is Happy Outlook, a dungeon which has tons of rare spawns. Usually, people do this dungeon near the end of the run, but I moved it here because the IQ codes are still active at this point, which allows me to grab extra Happiny as a backup in case I don't get Chansey or Blissey here, who are the 2 hardest Pokemon to recruit in this dungeon. Unlike its 2 evolutions, Happiny is very common in this dungeon. So doing this dungeon right now, while I still have the Treasure Chamber codes active, can save me the trouble of looking for 2% Blissey encounters, and even give me a chance to IQ grind the Igglybuff and Cleffa I got earlier. Blissey also has a negative 12% recruitment rate, so I really don't think it'd be worth doing this dungeon later. You'd usually just end up sitting in this dungeon for ages waiting for it to work out. This dungeon also allows me to show off a new strategy I came up with that wasn't used previously. Normally, if you find a good floor for rare spawns, runners would set Lantern to just use Stockfile to buff its defenses and then tank a bunch of hits from enemies, spawning more Pokemon onto the floor. Then they have to go around with X-Ray specs killing all of them off. Now, if I happen to get a good floor for something, that's great, I wouldn't mind sticking around in those cases. However, what if I told you there was a fast way to go about seeing what you spawned if you decided to use Lantern on a floor you didn't really want to stay on, and could even leave before you hunted everything down? Let me introduce to you Perish Checking. Now, if you're familiar with the main series, you probably know that Perish Song is a move that'll kill anything it hits 3 turns afterwards. This is still true in this game, though that's actually the worst part of the move for our purposes, as you can't actually recruit anything that dies by Perish Song damage. What Perish Song does happen to have is terrible accuracy and floor-wide range, meaning it'll attempt to hit every single enemy on the floor when used. It also happens to list everything it tries to hit in the message log when used. You might be able to see where I'm going with this. I use Lantern to spam the floor with spawns near the stairs, and then use Perish Song. Afterward, I press L+B to look at the message log, allowing me to see everything I spawned in way quicker. If there's nothing I want on the floor, I can just leave without tracking everything down. Of course, you need to accept the risk of killing whatever you're trying to recruit with this strategy, as you're still using Perish Song. However, I find the increase in speed checking spawns to be well worth this minor risk. This strategy does evolve over the course of the run, mostly near the end where new ideas from both myself and others in chat came up. When using Lantern for spawns, you also want to be trying to minimize the attack animations you get during this process. If a floor has darkness, a good way to go about this would be to position Lantern at the entrance of a room with an enemy behind it. When you do it like this, only certain attack animations from the enemies will show, which saves a ton of time while spawning in more Pokemon. For now, with this new strategy, I recruit Sunflora, Happiny, Skitty, Chikorita, Togepi, Gulpin, Togetic, Seedot, Turtwig, Persian Meowth, Mime Jr., and Sunkern. Since I didn't get Chansey or Blissey before I got everything else I wanted, I also grabbed 2 more Happiny before leaving. Before the next dungeon, I go and do an IQ grind to set up one of our Happiny and the last Igglybuff and Cleffa for their evolutions, which I'll do later when I can Wondermail in the required items. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I can delete the codes we had earlier and get our next set of Wondermail missions. This set will give us the other legendary challenge letters, which are all set in the same dungeon, while also giving us the next 3 story dungeons and Lost Wilderness. I also grabbed the Shimmer Hill unlock from the job board here. Our next dungeon is Aegis Cave Pit. If you're confused at what I mean here, I mean we're just doing the part where you fight Regigigas. We're not doing the other 3 chambers right now. Using the Jirachi exploit, we can actually unlock the parts of dungeons that take place past midway points, something we'll be fully abusing here to not have to deal with this dungeon's gimmick as much. I'll explain this dungeon's gimmick on the second trip that we're going to do later, as we do need to come back here to recruit the Reggies. Aegis Cave is probably my weakest dungeon in the entire run. You can't use Perish Song here for much because most of the recruits are unknown. Unknown don't have their letter in their name, so Perish Song lists any variant of unknown as just unknown in the message log, which doesn't really give me any useful information. For this first trip, you want to try and focus on getting the unknown near the beginning and the end of the alphabet, as all the unknown have equal spawn rates in the pit, unlike the other parts of the cave. Aegis Cave is really all about how well you can identify good spawn rate of usefulness for certain Pokemon, which means you're likely to have to go through the dungeons multiple times to get everything. I also want to be trying to get unknown stones here that can spell out the words Ice, Rock, and Steel. For this trip, I get Unknown J, K, B, T, R, Golbat, Machoke, Unknown F, L, question mark, C, Machamp, Unknown W, E, P, X, A, N, S, T, Z, I, and U. I also grab a few stones here, specifically a K stone, an R stone, 2 C stones, an E stone, and an S stone, which we're going to use later. At the bottom of the pit, we take out Regigigas with some weird Lopunny, Gardevoir, Medicham we never met, and they thank us for adventuring with them. I don't really remember doing that, but okay, I guess. They give us first dibs on any treasure in the newly unlocked Concealed Ruins and go on their way. Once we're back at home, I reopen the challenge letter we used to get into the pit the first time, since that dungeon will relock after the first time you clear the pit and unlock the ice cave you're supposed to have. I also grabbed the mission for Giant Volcano from a Dragonair in the cafe. Our next dungeon is infamous to anyone who's played a Recruit 'em All in Explorers before, Spatial Rift. Now, normally you can't recruit during your first visit to this dungeon, but if you come in through Deep Spatial Rift instead, you can recruit just fine during this first visit. If you've not played a Recruit 'em All in these games before, you probably wouldn't understand what the issue with this dungeon is, so it's time to explain. Spatial Rift is the sole home of several rare Pokemon. Specifically, this is the only dungeon where you can recruit Bronzor, Porygon, Tropius, Lunatone, and Solrock. Now, just 5 Pokemon doesn't seem all that bad at first glance, and there are other Pokemon who are exclusive to this dungeon. But these Pokemon are all at about 3% or lower chances to spawn on a given floor. This by itself would still be annoying, but it's made worse because this dungeon also happens to not have spawn rate abuse available, as there are not 15 Pokemon on any floor of this dungeon. We're still not done here though. This gets even worse, because there's no dungeon in the game where Porygon 2, Porygon Z, or Bronzong spawn with Recruitment enabled, meaning you need to get 2 extra Porygon and an extra Bronzor. This dungeon is actually the dungeon I developed Perish checking for, since you can't get floors with better spawn rates for anything, meaning the fastest way you can get much of anything here would be to max out the spawns on a floor and leave it there's nothing around. I don't have to get everything on this trip, since I also need to make a second trip later for Palkia, but for this trip, I go through Perish checking and recruit Sableye, Electivire, Drowsy, Gligar, Charizard, Chimecho, Honchkrow, and Magnezone before we run into something else of interest. In this dungeon, we get our first taste of the worst case scenario for Illuminate's tracks. Monster House floors. You see, Monster House floors have a fun little mechanic where they only allow 4 Pokemon to be on the floor at a given time that aren't from the Monster House. This also does not change even after you clear out the Monster House. So if you get a good floor for spawns but it has a Monster House, you might as well just leave after checking out the house to see if you got anything in there. I got a Monster House here on floor 5. Spatial Rift Monster Houses are especially annoying though, not because you get less chances for the rare spawns, but actually because Chimecho can start a healing loop with Healing Wish that can take an eternity. Thankfully that doesn't happen during this run, but I've had times playing through this dungeon where I didn't take a Petrify Orb and couldn't kill the Trimecho in one hit. I was stuck dealing with Healing Wish and healing the entire monster house on loop for 20 minutes. It was terrible. The real pain from this monster house happens on the following floor. Isn't that lucky? No! You bitch! I forgot to turn it off! Damn it! Yeah, Lantern killed a Porygon because the first enemy I ran into on the following floor was a Porygon and I forgot to turn Discharge off. That was painful. Probably the single worst Pokemon to make that mistake against in the whole game. Luckily for me, a Parish check revealed that there were 2 more on this floor, and the first of those 2 joined the team. I also get a Toxicroak and Hypno while I'm looking for the other one. The second Porygon doesn't join us, but that is the game we play here in Spatial Rift. I also learned the hard way to never do a Parish check from inside a massive room. I waste so much time on floor 7 trying to set up a Parish check in this giant room that just doesn't work because everything that spawns in is immediately targeting me, leading me to never max out the spawns on the floor. After having that realization, I recruit a Jolteon and turn Discharge back on to clear out the big room. Guess who decided to come into the room while the move was still turned on? That's a Porygon. No, I'm just set up to kill it! No! Yeah, that was fun. Apparently I was so blown away by how little I really could have done there that I forgot how to speak proper English for a second. I assume I meant to say, and I just set up Lantern to kill it. Either way, I don't turn Lantern's moves on much for the rest of the run, as I become too afraid of accidentally killing more rares. After that tragedy, we make our way to Palkia and quickly defeat it. Afterward, Riolu and Totodile materialize out of nowhere and Palkia suddenly gets trapped in a nightmare. After putting my team into the nightmare, Cresselia tries to convince our team to commit self-deletion. Pretty harsh thing to say as a first impression. It's revealed that this Cresselia is actually Darkrai, and we apparently need to go to Dark Crater to stop him from whatever he's doing, along with Mrs. Reviver Seed Muncher. Our last story dungeon code is actually Dark Crater and not Deep Dark Crater. This might seem weird because we can just normally go there if Cresselia takes us right now, but the thing is, if we leave with Cresselia here, we can't recruit Pokemon during this visit. However, we actually can recruit Pokemon here if we go through the Crossroads. I take Riolu back onto the team for this dungeon for reasons I'll explain in Deep Dark Crater. I grab Charmeleon, Hippowdon, 2 Combuskin, Monferno, Camerupt, Charmander, Slugma, Cyndaquil, Chimchar, Numel, Growlithe, Flareon, Rapidash, Ponyta, Arcanine, Torchic, 2 Quilava, and Magcargo during the first part of the dungeon. At the midway, we end up being forced to take the Muncher of all Reviver Seeds, Cresselia, with us for the remainder of the trip. The weird part isn't actually that Cresselia joins up again, though. The weird part is that you lose the ability to send your Pokemon home after the midway, though you can still recruit new Pokemon. This is why I took Riolu along, so that my extra Pokemon weren't going to be dead weight during the boss fight. In Deep Dark, I grab Magmortar, Infernape, Mismagius, and Torkoal on my way to Darkrai. Cresselia did live up to her namesake and indeed ate one of my revives during the trip, but that definitely could have gone worse. We meet up with Darkrai at the bottom, and he explains his edgy goal of engulfing the world in darkness to us, revealing that he was the one who attacked Temporal Tower and was also the one that caused our accident at the start of the game. I think Past Me had a very valid question regarding this cutscene. How did you learn of our impending arrival from the future exactly? Regardless of how he found out we came from the future, he creates a monster house for us to fight because he's too much of a coward to fight on his own. Somehow this includes an Arbok who isn't even in this dungeon. In the end though, it doesn't help him much and he quickly goes down. He tries to escape after his defeat, but Palkia destroys the portal he used to escape, causing Darkrai to now have amnesia like we did and wander the world aimlessly, preventing any threat he poses in the future. Who knows, maybe we'll see him again someday. With the world saved, Cresselia decides she hasn't had enough tasty Reviver Seeds yet and decides to try and join our team. I tell her she's free to join, but she isn't eating any more seeds, giving us our 273rd Pokemon. I also obtained the mission for World Abyss in the process from the cafe, and evolved Quilava and Combuskin before setting off for Landslide Cave. In Landslide Cave, we're going to be doing all the legendary challenge letters at the same time, giving us Mewtwo, Suicune, Raikou, and Entei, in addition to the regular recruits at this dungeon being Shuckle, Dustox, Wormadam Trashcloak, Gibble, and Gramble. After we're done in Landslide Cave, the weird Manaphy from a while ago comes back and tries to join our team, claiming it had to come back to where it hatched. I think I'd remember if that happened in my own home, but either way, it joins our team here by pulling at our partner's heartstrings. With our new Manaphy in tow, I grab Mount Avalanche from the cafe and enter some more Wondermail codes to unlock Temporal Spire, along with the rock and steel chambers of Aegis Cave. This gives me a couple moments to mentally prepare myself for what's coming next. The most infamous recruit in just about every Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game, Kecleon. However, I think this is going to be where part 1 for this video ends. I originally wanted this whole thing to be a single video, however it's quickly becoming apparent to me that I'm burning myself out on editing by trying to do that, and so I need a bit of a break. If you want to see part 2, leave this video a like and let me know in the comments below, as I definitely want to make sure people are actually interested in seeing the rest of this run before I finish the other half of this video. I know I've been doing a lot of Mystery Dungeon content lately, which isn't really everyone's thing, but I've been in a real Mystery Dungeon mood as of late. There's another Pokédex playthrough video which has all of its footage recorded already that I plan to also put out when I'm less burnt out on this sort of thing. But either way, I'd like to thank you all for watching this long-ass part 1 if you're still around. It really means the world to me. I hope to see you next time for whatever happens to come out next. Later on, buds, and as always, take care.